Hey everyone, this video is for Fujifilm photographers and really anyone hoping to learn about the digital teleconverters that are more common in today's cameras. And I want to bring this up because when Fujifilm announced the GFX 100 RF recently, a medium format fixed lens camera, there was a ton of hype around how this fixed lens camera really had four different lenses because it has three digital teleconverter options. And while that's not necessarily bad or inaccurate information, it just doesn't tell the whole story. Or I guess I should say the big picture, since we're all photographers. So, what I want to do here is explain what digital teleconverters really do and the three big gotchas that you need to know if you plan on using a digital teleconverter. Why it's not entirely accurate to say that it's like having different lenses. If there are any other topics that you ever want to learn about and have me explain on this channel, please let me know. Leave those in the comments and I'll consider doing a video about them. So here are the three reasons why digital teleconverters are different from actual physical lenses. First, what is a digital teleconverter? Well, it's nothing more than an in-camera crop. Just like how you might crop a photo in Lightroom, or even on your phone, you crop the edges off of the picture to make your subject appear larger and more prominent in the frame. That's all a digital teleconverter is doing. It is cropping and recording a smaller area of the sensor. It's not giving your lens any kind of magical powers. It's not magnifying the image. It's just recording a smaller area. Looking at the X100 VI, which has a fixed 23 millimeter lens, which is an equivalent field of view of 35 millimeters, when you use the digital teleconverter and you're at the 1.4 times crop, it says 50 millimeters, and then the 2 times crop says 70 millimeters. All that's referring to is the cropped field of view, as if you were zooming in from 35 millimeters to 50 millimeters and then to 70 millimeters. That field of view is going to shrink. And so that's all those numbers refer to, is the equivalent field of view for that lens. But it's not exactly the same as having a 35 millimeter, a 50 millimeter, and a 70 millimeter lens in one fixed lens camera for these three reasons. The first thing to know, and probably the one that most of you care about, is the drop in resolution when using a digital teleconverter. These are found in the latest Fujifilm X series cameras that have the 40 megapixel sensor. And like I said, that GFX 100 RF, which has a 100 megapixel sensor. Now, these are ludicrous amounts of resolution. I would go out on a limb to say that no one needs a 40 megapixel APS-C camera unless you plan on doing some heavy cropping, and then that's going to drop that resolution to something that's a little more manageable, something that is useful in nearly any situation. And that is why we have these digital teleconverters on these larger resolution cameras, is for the in-camera cropping ability, which is great. But here are some numbers for how much that resolution is going to drop. When you're using the 1.4 times digital teleconverter in the X series cameras, that resolution is going to drop from 40 megapixels to 20 megapixels. And then when you use the 2 times teleconverter, that's going to drop in half again, down to 10 megapixels. That's still going to give you the ability to print that photo up to about an 11 by 14 and still get a really sharp photo, a really sharp print. You could print it even larger, but you're going to notice some degradation after that. But when you are in these digital teleconverter modes, the camera is going to tell you, hey, when you're using that 1.4 times digital teleconverter, it's going to save it as a medium-sized file, and then the 2 times is going to be saving it as a small file, just to let you know, hey, you are having a pretty serious drop in resolution here. On the GFX 100 RF, when you are using the maximum digital teleconverter, that 100 megapixel sensor crops into an image area that gives you a resolution of 20 megapixels. 20 megapixels isn't anything to scoff at. That is still quite a bit of resolution. The second difference why digital teleconverters aren't the exact same thing as a physical lens is the change in the depth of field. The reason your depth of field gets shallower as you zoom in on something. You go to a longer focal length, you're zooming in, is because those out of focus points of light start to get magnified and enlarged as you zoom in so that they appear blurry. You actually notice that those points of light are blurry. That only happens in optical magnification when you're going to those longer focal lengths. A digital crop isn't doing that. And so you're not going to have a decrease in depth of field as you crop into your photo using a digital teleconverter. You can see that here in these very basic examples that I just went out and shot in my backyard. One of these is using an actual focal length of 50 millimeters, and the other is using a 2x digital teleconverter with the lens at 23 millimeters. And you can see the difference in the depth of field between the 23 millimeter lens with the 2x crop and the actual 50 millimeter lens. That depth of field is much shallower. You get a lot more smoothness in those out of focus areas using the actual physical longer focal length. Are these differences going to be super perceptible to you? They may not matter at all. Like, this may be a moot point for you, but it's something that you still need to consider. The third difference is the perspective distortion that happens as you zoom in. If you're using a wide angle lens, objects in the background are going to appear much smaller relative to a foreground subject. And then as you zoom in and you start using longer focal lengths, those objects in the background are going to start to appear much larger and much closer relative to your foreground subject. If you're just cropping a wide angle lens, those background objects are still going to appear as far away because you are not optically magnifying them. Now, this is an extreme example between 24 millimeters and 200 millimeters. The Fujifilm X series line digital teleconverters at most go to 2x, so that 24 millimeter lens becomes a 50 millimeter lens. That background, that perspective distortion isn't going to be as amplified as it is here. Now, you may not notice or you may not care about this difference, but it is a characteristic of having actual physical different focal lengths, an optical characteristic that you cannot replicate with digital teleconverters. This difference will be less apparent at wider focal lengths, but you may notice it more when you're using more telephoto focal lengths. So those are the three reasons why having a digital teleconverter is not truly exactly the same as having a bunch of different lenses. All you're doing is cropping in on the sensor. You're going to have a massive drop in resolution doing that. The depth of field isn't going to be as shallow, and you're not going to have the perspective distortion offered by having actual physical different lenses. So now, knowing this, do any of these differences really matter? Does it sway you one way or another? Are you still going to use a digital teleconverter, or are you going to go out and get actual different lenses? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. Please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and we'll see you in the next video.